Hey music teachers, it's time for the next installment of our classroom culture series, and today I've got a bit of a controversial topic for you, and that is sarcasm and whether or not and how and when to use it in the classroom. Everybody has different humor styles, from corny dad jokes to nonsensical things, and sarcasm, if it's used unthoughtfully, can be damaging to students. So I want to talk about some things to consider if and when you choose to use it. I personally have a very sarcastic humor style, and I also taught middle school for many years, so I have personally spent a lot of time honing this skill. So what are some things to think about? Number one is if it feels authentic to you. If you are not a naturally sarcastic person, then you can feel free to scroll on to the next adorable dog video, because it's not for everyone, and if it doesn't feel real to you, then that is totally fine. The next thing to consider is the age of the students that you work with. If you are working with fifth graders on a daily basis, that's going to be an extremely different scenario than if you're working with 11th graders. Fifth graders have had much less exposure to different humor styles, and they're not going to be as well versed in communicating that style. Related but separate is the amount of time that you've been working with those students. I had the good fortune of teaching 5th through 8th grade for a long time, and so by the time that I was on my 4th year with those students, they knew me very well, and I was able to use a little bit of my own personal humor with them rather than the students that I just met 2 months ago. Using sarcasm without harm depends on a certain level of trust, and it takes time to build that trust no matter how good you are at it. So if you are experiencing a new class, now's probably not the best time to break out heavy use of sarcasm in the class. Whereas if you've been working with students for multiple years at a time, you can be a little bit more loose. The biggest and most important thing I feel it's important to consider when you're using sarcasm with kids is where you are directing those jokes. Particularly with younger students, and as I'm getting to know students, I only kept my sarcasm directed and aimed at myself. This means that I'm never being sarcastic with the kids about their own performance or behavior or anything else. I'm never saying, oh yeah, good job, trumpets, when they didn't do a good job. That gets in the way of the honesty and trust that we've built as a group. But if I make a mistake on the podium, I'm allowed to say about myself, wow, great job, Miss D, really crushing it today, keep on going. Or if I am doing my happy dance or my very famous I told you so dance, I am allowed to talk about on the podium how great of a dancer I am. Using sarcasm in this manner that's self-inflicted allows me to use my true humor and let them get to know me, but I'm not doing any damage to the relationships that I'm building with the students. And for those students who maybe aren't quite understanding it yet, it will help those students kind of build that skill of understanding sarcasm, even if they're not going to be using it themselves. It is an important skill in our culture to be able to pick it out when it's being used. It's also really important to get to know your students as individuals, and some students are going to be very adept at using sarcasm and some will not get it at all. And so when you're using that with kids, especially in smaller situations like one-on-one or small group lessons, when you're not with the whole ensemble, you'll start to get to know which students are using this as part of their own humor and which students are not using it at all, and you can kind of start to tailor your humor to those students a little bit. If you're lucky enough and blessed enough to be able to work with students over the course of multiple years and you really get to know them, then you will find out which students are capable of and enjoy a little bit of back and forth ribbing gently and which students don't. And it's important to keep in mind that if you are prepared to dish out the ribbing and the roasting to students, you should be able to take it as well. That's it for today's talk on sarcasm, and make sure you give us a like and a follow to join us next week when we wrap up this culture series by talking about building a larger community outside the music room. Catch you next time.